Everybody, buonasera a tutti, and welcome to Advocacy, Journalism and Videotape, a Blurred Line. This session is going to take place all in English, but my Italian's not very good, but I will translate any questions that you have from Italian later, if we get that far. So I took the title of this session as meaning advocacy, journalism, and any new format out there which is going to have some kind of an impact. And I think the questions that are pulled out by that are, what do advocacy and journalism have in common? I would love us not to have too deep a conversation about whether journalism should be advocacy or advocacy should be journalism, because that conversation has been happening since journalism was invented, and has been happening a lot over the course of the last few days here in Perugia. But I do think it's an interesting question to be asking in the context of what's happening to journalism today. So, I'd like us to talk about that. The second thing that I'd like us to talk about is this question of videotape, as in sex, lies, and videotape, this question of new formats. And this, I think, is one of the most interesting things that the collective panel have been working with. We have on display an enormous variety of different formats for impact here. And I think that perhaps, I've just been cut off, no. So that's the second key area that I would like us to look at. And then of course the third is how this question of advocacy and journalism and new formats play off each other. Before we get into a conversation, what I'd like to do, however, is to introduce our four panelists, which we're very, very lucky to have here, not just as individuals, but also as a group. They bring a really extraordinary spread of experience to this question. So, I'm not going to introduce them, they're going to introduce themselves, and I'm going to start furthest from me with Balázs Dines, who runs the European Civil Liberties Project.
Thank you so much. So, the European Civil Liberties Project, oh, thank you. Is a project of the Open Society Foundations. It's a European project, and prior joining OSF, I was working with a small Hungarian human rights NGO, and that was the first time I came across to video advocacy about 6 years ago, when we realized that they're producing these amazing reports, which are great, full of data, full of interesting stuff, but nobody reads them. That's a problem. And fortunately, that was the time when, at least the way I saw it back then, there was a shift in access to technologies and to access to methods. Like 10 years ago, the average way how NGOs could do films was to go to film people, go to journalists, and give them smaller or bigger commissions. But then about I would say 6, 7, probably a bit less, probably a bit more years ago, that changed, and that time we just trained one of our staff, and we started a small video advocacy project, which ever since grew pretty big, and that organization is now functioning as a kind of knowledge center in Central and Eastern Europe and training other organizations to do films. So that was an amazing moment. 2 years ago, I joined OSF. And with the European Civil Liberties Project, we have different missions. And one of the missions is to build a new, visible and effective network of European human rights and civil liberties organizations. And one of the primary methods of visibility these days is video advocacy. Because again, these NGOs can provide the best data, the best arguments. Problem is, people are not that interested to read lengthy papers of NGOs. Videos are more attractive and more sexy, and we can see them on the results. So my point is, two things: how the changes in technology are changing the way how NGOs and advocacy organizations operate, and the other big thing is not the line between journalism and advocacy, but between the line advocacy and public education. Again, a few years ago, most of the NGOs, I'm not saying all of them, but most of the NGOs, thought about advocacy as high-level political advocacy, right? To talk to politicians, decision makers, And they also talked about public education as something different. Today, mostly, or at least in large part thanks to video advocacy, these lines are not really existing anymore. A good way of doing advocacy is to do powerful videos and ask people to turn their anger and commitment and enthusiasm into action, and that's a very exciting change in the NGO world, and I wish more funders would acknowledge that. As a starting point, that's enough. I don't think I used my 5 to 10 minutes, but
I'll hammer you later.
good.
Great. That was a great introduction to what I'll talk about now. So my name's Gabby. I'm from an organization called Tactical Technology Collective. We're a Berlin-based international NGO. We've been going for the last 12 years on on something we call Beyond the 60-page report. So the idea of how to reach your audiences through ways that they'll understand and want to engage in. So as a capacity building organization, we produce toolkits, guides on issues such as privacy, surveillance, digital security, visualizing information for advocacy, and the last one is investigations. So we produce toolkits, physical toolkits, that have now been translated into 16 languages. And all of our work is licensed under Creative Commons, and we want to encourage people to take our work and to remix it for their context. So the idea of what we're trying to do is build capacity within our sector, the NGO sector, but also the art sector within artists, designers, journalists, and to talk about going beyond this 60-page report. So we do that in a variety of ways. One of our kind of best ways is through trainings. We offer a lot of trainings, and there are a lot of challenges associated with doing this work. As you were saying, I think we're all trying to get funders to fund this work more, because I think it's so important to reach this holy grail of an audience, which is the public. So normally with our trainings, we focus on talking activists through what their message is, thinking critically about their messaging and their audience, who influences the audiences they're trying to influence, and what kind of media formats that they consume. So there's no point making a video if your audience is an offline audience. So we try to encourage people to think about how people consume information. Our project that I want to talk about is called Exposing the Invisible, which is a series of 3 documentaries that kind of showcase citizen-led investigations through using new technology. And it's meant to provide inspiration for activists who are kind of not these celebrity journalists or celebrity activists, but kind of everyday people who have an issue and then use technology to investigate their issue and then tell people about it. So we featured Elliot Higgins in one of our films, who is also known as Brown Moses, who has a really inspiring story because he was a finance and admin assistant who just had a baby and was looking for something else to do. So he started watching videos from YouTube on the Syrian conflict. And now he's one of the world's, I think he's the world's leading expert on arms in Syria. And he is a UK-based guy. He's never been to Syria. He doesn't speak Arabic. And through watching hundreds of videos, he's able to pick out arms, and he exposed an arms trade route through Croatia. So they're the kind of examples that we like to show, that citizen-led investigation using open source data is very possible. So yeah, just in summary, we're an NGO that likes to show inspiring stories and also test out ideas ourselves. So we make a lot of things ourselves.
Can I ask you to tell everybody some of the key tools that you have available on your site?
Sure. So we also make a lot of websites, and we like making websites, which is difficult for our audience who's trying to find any information about us. So some of the key tools that we have, as I said, is toolkits. So they're online toolkits and physical toolkits. The most famous is Security in a Box, where over 2 million people look at it each year. and it's become the go-to resource for security for activists. Our other tools are, videos, animations, data visualization tools. We're an open source organization, so we try to promote open source tools, but there's not that many available, unfortunately. But we try and promote the ones that are.
Where should I start?
It's difficult.
25 years ago, I was a documentary filmmaker. And the reason I went to make documentaries, I'm Israeli. I was born in Israel. I'm living in Israel. And I was very concerned about the occupation that I'm sure you all know about. And I thought that the best format that I should use is documentary filmmaking. So I'll go around, I'll film what's happening, I'm going to make film, I'm going to show it to the Israeli public and to the world when you're going to end the occupation. It didn't work. But mostly I realized that, you living with people and telling and shooting their stories, collecting information, sometimes working on film for years, and in the end it's been screened 2 times in television, maybe a few festivals, and that's it. There is no impact, 0 impact. So it's important for the content and to understand what's happening if you want to learn about the subject, but really to create an impact, and I'm a completely impact-driven person, it was not enough for me. Then I decided to join a human rights organization called B'Tselem. B'Tselem is the Israeli Information Center for Human Rights on Occupied Territories. It's a very good information center. They have great reporters and researchers, and they're bringing evidence of human rights violations. But the thing is that they're making an amazing report that nobody's reading. People are reading them, but it's mostly decision makers and NGOs, but the public that's supposed to get this information is not getting any it into his... Okay, I'm going to slow down and I'm going to fix my accent. Okay, if I'm speaking too fast, anybody can tell me like this? Okay. I thought I'm slow. One of the things that also was very clear, that in this conversation about the occupation, there was voice for the settlers, there is voice for the Israeli lefties, there is voice to the army, but the Palestinians are absent from this conversation. And they needed something to be able to tell their stories. And what we decided to do is basically to give the people that are suffering the most, cameras to be able to tell their stories. So we analyzed the West Bank, and we picked 100 families that are living in the most risky places. It's mean close to checkpoints, side by side with settlers, or close to army bases, and they're confronting on a daily basis, they're engaging in violence and they've been attacked. We give them cameras and they ask them to start filming their reality. And quite fast, we start getting amazing footage that we never saw before, how the violence, how the attacks look like in first hand by their eyes. And this was the first time we start putting these visuals into the Israeli media. And the media is a very stupid and superficial animal, right? Like if you give them something sexy, violence, they would use it. And you need visual to tell a story. That's why video is so important, because they need something to tell the story. It was an amazing project, still running. It managed to bring a lot of evidence. We managed with these visuals to sue soldiers and settlers and force the army and the police to investigate. And it's still running as a change and basically redefined the struggle for human rights in occupied territories. And then I thought 6 years ago, why not taking the same idea to other places in the world? Why not focus just in Israel, Palestine? There's so many communities and places that need this kind of tools to be able to tell their stories. So I went undercover and started traveling to all kind of places when media was not reporting on. And we're focusing specifically on places media can't or won't go. We opened an organization in London called Videre, es credere, seeing is believing. And what we understood that we have to shift a bit the methods of the way we work in the West Bank to the situation in these places. Now, I'm not going to tell you the name of the places that we are working for security reasons. I'm going to tell you the name of the partners. But we, at the moment, have 500 people filming on a daily basis human rights violation. In Israel, with all the problems, you can still take a camera out and film. Nobody's going to shoot you unless it's a war or it may be Gaza. But in places that are dictatorship, in rural places in Africa, you can't pull a camera. You can't pull even a phone. So we decided to take everything undercover, and we're mostly distributing hidden cameras, small cameras that nobody sees, that people can film and blend in the environment and bring amazing evidence without being killed. So it's more complex than just giving cameras. There's a lot of security assessment and the whole project that we are building before we are doing anything. So kind of on a nutshell, the way we are working, the methodology is we kind of analyzing where images are missing and who are the ones that can film these images. We're partnering with them. We give them equipment. We sometimes build them equipment because the thing that you can buy off the shelves are not necessarily things that people can use in these places. So we're taking the technology from these cameras and putting it in stuff that they can use. It can be stone, can be wood, can be their clothes. We're working with them to analyze the risk in every location, what it's mean to engage, what it's mean to film, how you're taking the information out. We're doing a shooting plan. They are filming. Then we verify the information very, very well in the highest standard in a variety of ways. And then we're making sure that we take this information to places we believe can create a change. Now, media for us is just one tool. We use media when we want to bring the information to the public or to show what's happening and create awareness. But in many cases, we're skipping the media and going straight to lawyers and use this visual as an evidence in court. Sometimes it's briefing decision makers and talking with them about what's happening in the location because they will not have the information from the ground the way they should have. Sometimes it's about building local campaigns with this visual for people to work and run campaigns to change the reality. So this is what we're doing. We're working around 7 countries, variety of projects from corruption around election to gays and lesbian rights to minerals and variety of other issues. So I'll stop here.
Quite difficult to speak after you guys. I'm Valeria, I'm an Italian journalist and also a blogger at the moment. I mean, I don't have to tell you, I think most of the people here are Italian journalists or working in the Italian media communication. And I mean, I have a particular story. As maybe most of the young people here, I wanted to be a journalist. I wanted to have an impact on social issues in my country and human rights as well. But you know maybe better than me that it can be quite frustrating here in this country. So my interest brought me abroad, and I had few experiences in several countries, such as, for example, Egypt, just during the revolution, and that was very important for me, and even in Middle East. Just talking about Middle East, what you were saying about Middle East, and just not about Middle East, but about Israel and Palestinians. I mean, I think what is happening now in Italy is quite similar, and that's the main reason why I came back to Italy and I accepted to work for, at the moment, as a communication consultant for Open Society Foundations about projects regarding migrations and refugees. Because I think it's very similar what's happening here, because what's happening at the moment here, it's something very big, and mainstream media are not maybe covering as they should. Why? Because for many, many reasons, even because we know already that there is a crisis in our job, and also because they don't give voice to the people that are involved in this phenomenon. They don't make visible as much as they need. And so what we are trying to do at the moment, in different ways, of course, is, okay, from me, for example, I decided to put a little bit on the side my main profession as proper journalist, and I opened a blog on a newspaper, online newspaper. I decided to open this blog on a newspaper, starting to think about what's the main newspaper that people usually in Italy read. And I discovered that it was Il Fatto Quotidiano. So now at the moment I have a blog there. And why I decided to open a blog there? Because when you want to cover stories such as migrants, human rights in Italy on that kind of newspaper, you know that you're going to face a lot of troubles because it's a very tricky field. So you usually receive a lot of very tough comments. Sometimes they are quite hard as well. Not just on the blog, but even on Twitter, and even on Facebook, through private messages on Facebook. But I heard something very interesting, I think the first day that I was here during the festival. Because when you receive this kind of comments, sometimes you think, oh my God, what am I doing? Did I do the right choice? Did I make the right choice? But another journalist told me, well, when you receive these bad comments, it means that you are building a conversation. So you have a reaction from your audience. And it was my choice. I wanted to engage voters, and I know that Italian voters sometimes, often, they are the same people that they don't want migrants, they hate Roma people, and so this is one way I am trying to change, have an impact here after many experiences abroad. And then the second that I mentioned is this new activity with Open Society Foundations. I think you probably know that Open Society Foundations is supporting many NGOs, Italian NGOs here. But at the moment, we are focusing our attention, as I said, even in this case, about what's happening in the Mediterranean Sea and in our country with migrants and refugees. So we are trying to build up a communication campaign in order to let people understand what's happening now in this moment in this country. Because people should see not just through the mainstream media what's happening, but even through alternative media. So it's going to be quite difficult. It's going to be, we're starting right now, and but yeah, maybe we can explore more. Can I?
Go for it, please.
Okay. So for example, okay, I'll tell you something more about this campaign. We are going to ask through, in different ways, of course, supporting NGOs, and giving also information to mainstream journalists. We are going to focus on three issues. First of all, protection of these people. Second, reception, and the third, the asylum reform. This is because we believe that mainstream media cannot have an impact on this, because mainstream media, you already know in Italy, they don't have any interest in doing that. So, but the problem is now, how can we have an impact in order to change the narrative, and also to bring voters to change their behavior, their attitude towards migrants? Well, I think it's going to be difficult as well, even because what's happening at the moment is happening in the sea, and but when they arrive here, what's happening? So we're trying to engage activists, local journalists as well, because we found that they are very, very motivated, and trying to improve their abilities, capacities, in order to tell people what is really happening, why they don't have to be afraid about the migratory phenomenon. And also then, of course, as you said at the beginning, what's the, what is there in, where is the, the difference between communication, journalism, and advocacy? I think in this case, the communication must be the base, and journalists as well, but in Italy, journalism, as I said, is not the high level of journalism, so you have to work a lot with activists, and at the same time, then there is the advocacy. The advocacy, I think you cannot, maybe sometimes is a very close, it's something that there is a continuum between these activities, but advocacy is when then you put all these reasons that you are trying to push, and you go there to decision makers and you say, look, these are the data, this is what's happening. So in this case about migration. So let's do something for change. And of course, then you have to, in order to have some results, you have to have very strong community and a very strong network between activists that, as I said, it's the base.
Thank you all very much for that overview. A long time ago, I set up a free speech platform called Domotics, and the idea was that it would create a platform for people to tell stories which are otherwise not being covered in parts of the world which had no access to mainstream media. And I set it up as a business, which meant that our idea was that we would take these stories sent in by whoever they happened to be, wherever they were in the world, and sell them on to mainstream media. I thought this was a brilliant idea, obviously, because what we thought we could do was to reach scale extremely fast, taking the words of somebody in Mali, say, and getting on the front pages of the New York Times. My experience there was fascinating, and I loved it. But one story for you, which seems to point to quite a lot of the conversations that you've had in your own heads over the course of the last few years in the way that you've worked. One day, we got a set of pictures from Mogadishu. A photographer had managed to do a tour of Mogadishu with the Shabab militia, and very few pictures had emerged out of Somalia. We shipped them to all the newspapers that we had relationships with. On the same day in London, a photographer who contributed to Domotics was walking around Hyde Park and saw a man on a bench with a pelican. The pictures of the man on the bench with the pelican sold to every single newspaper in the UK except for The Guardian, and the Shabab militia pictures live in some cyber ghost world. They've never seen the light of day. In other words, relying on mainstream media as your core dissemination channel is no longer really viable. And I think that the four of you in different ways are talking about that. Valeria, when you say, I gave up my job as a proper journalist to become a blogger, to talk directly to an audience, you're saying something very rude about what proper journalism is. Oren, when you give up working as a documentary filmmaker to take the work that you're doing directly to courts, you're bypassing the traditional dissemination channels. So I think maybe a question to all of you here. Has the big shift been that you no longer need mainstream media? And if that is the case, what are the most efficient channels for you to distribute the extremely important work that you're all doing? I'm just opening it up.
So first of all, I'm not necessarily agreeing totally with kind of bypassing media. I think media have a role and have an important role. It's just a matter about how you use it correctly and how you work with them. And we have to acknowledge what it means, what the media mean, and who is the media you're working with. Easily, obviously, The Guardian is much more easier platform from us than, I don't know, the Evening Standard in the UK. So I think you have to be very smart about how you're working with media and who you're working with. We, in many cases, engaging media before we even having the story and tell them what we're about to do. And we have some great collaboration with great media channels. Some show, I don't know how many of you know Carte Blanche from South Africa. It's a very good investigating television show, and we work with them hand in hand to supply them information, and then they run it and doing their own reporting using the information. Same thing with FGM in one of the countries that we are working. So it very much depends how you're building your engagement with the media, but you can't rely on them. You cannot trust them to be the only source and the gate of the distribution. And for us, it very much depends what impact mean. If it's media is one of the things that will improve the effect on the ground, then definitely use them. If they're not, they're not. And many times media can be very superficial and they're not presenting the whole picture or the message as you want to have it. And in many cases, human rights violation and their context can be very complex to classical media outlets. So I think it's just a matter about how you're working with media and what kind of, what you're compromising and what's not.
Yeah, three things on this very shortly. The first is, I think it's impossible to talk about the role of media in homogeneous terms. I mean, take a region, the European Union, which many outside of the EU would think of, something very homogeneous, where things are working. I mean, even in the EU, you would find really different ways how the mainstream media is still able to exercise its control function over power. I mean, the things are really different in the UK and Germany and in Romania and Bulgaria. The role of the state-owned media, which is huge in Central and Eastern Europe. So that the way how the mainstream is still important, and the way how NGOs and advocates should look for other ways of communicating is really different, even in the EU. The second is, what do we mean on impact? Exactly. I mean, do we think that simply distributing the information will deliver the results, or we think that there are certain countries where law enforcement agencies are simply not doing their jobs? I mean, there are excellent investigative reporting projects in some of the Central and Eastern European countries. Problem is, no one is acting on the discovered facts. Like they reveal the wrongdoings, but then police and prosecutors are not acting. And the third is, there is a difference between liking something and also getting involved into the sharing. So my approach is very much, it's if you see a video, like it, great, but that's just one part of the story. If an NGO or anyone who produced that video with advocacy purposes is not able to convince people to get involved, and one very obvious, it's not rocket science, way of involvement is sharing. At least share that thing. Without that, we won't get anywhere. So again, different. It's a question, what do we mean on impact? And it's a question on what extent we are able to involve our audiences.
I think for us, the impact question is key. And impact, especially for the world that I'm in, the NGO world, we often, impact is sometimes determined by funders and what you've agreed to do for the funding you've got and what you've agreed to deliver them, which I think funders are asking this question as much as we are, of what does impact mean. And all funders can go for right now that I've seen is number of unique visits, time on site. Well, actually not time on site. I wish that was one of the questions. But unique visits, how many people are you getting to your site? And how many people are you training? How many people are you reaching at events? That's the kind of metrics that they have to deal with, because like us, they're floundering for some kind of meaningful impact measurement. And I think over the course of change, it takes so long for change to occur. And I think funders have to move, and we all have to move into a different understanding of what impact means, and that like a visualization is just a visualization. It's not going to change much. It could aid in understanding that will then one day they'll take a different step and change something, but it's all on a longer journey. And I think that that's important to remember if you look at historic campaigns such as women getting the right to vote. I mean, that took years and years, smoking being considered bad. My mother was still smoking when I was in her, and I think I'm fine. But so I think that we've got to remember how long these things take to actually have effect. But looking at alternative distribution methods, I think, well, for example, Tactical Tech, we make things, and we very rarely get big media coverage for our products. And we disseminate them through our websites, and that's what we rely on. We rely on Twitter, we rely on Facebook, we rely face-to-face. And other NGOs do the same, where they just show it on their platforms, and they get people coming to their platforms. And that's what we do, but we're trying to look at alternative distribution methods. So, for example, to stay with film, which is why maybe some of you came, so we're working with a group who have made a feature-length documentary film that will come out later in the year that will be incredible. It will be shown in film festivals. And we're working with them on looking at alternative distribution methods and how we can take, for example, their offcuts that they didn't use, their data that they use for their film, and then put it on a platform that activists can then go take the bits that are relevant, screen them, and use them for their campaigns. So how can mass media, Hollywood, other media outlets kind of distribute their materials to an activist community that they can then reuse?
I want to just add something small about media, because we're talking about media as a whole kind of global thing. We have to remember that we're talking about Western media here, when we are not talking about Africa, for example, or places that we can't put stuff in the media. We don't, I don't know, like I walked around here, I didn't see many Africans around and many African journalists, and this is the time that I can criticize the organization? No, okay. But I'm saying seriously, you know, like, talk about Kenya, for example. Kenya is totally controlled, like, it seems like a free media, but it's not free media. You can't put anything there without, you have to expose your sources, for example, if you want to put something in the news. You have to, you apply by law. So it's a different conversation. So we're talking like all of us working probably, you know, in countries that the media is not necessarily what we look at media when we, in our head here. Sorry.
Just wanted to add that I believe as well that it's very important to use these new tools, such as, for example, when you want to communicate, let's talk about, for example, in my case of migration. So, for example, working on a platform and put on this platform ready contents. So you become like a point, I mean, an important point, or a source for other mainstream media, because I think as well that you cannot bypass mainstream media, and you have to take it into account. And as well in this, so the web, a website, a new platform is very important. And at the same time, you should also put ready stories, giving voice to these people that are involved in this case in migrations. And then there is also you have to give fact checking as well, because when it comes to numbers and people, and so it's very important. So you give more information, even not just to mainstream media, but even to people. And then I think also it's very, very important, just because you cannot bypass mainstream media, I think it's very important even the training of journalists. We have a very interesting project here in Italy, and program, and it's about an association that is called Carta di Roma. And Carta di Roma is monitoring the work of journalists, and they take into account if there is a violation of the code of ethics of the job. So you have the tool, even the legal tools, because if a journalist is not doing the proper job, then you can say you can do something, and you can do it in a legal way. And then also how to distribute these contents. I think I'm gonna say something very unpopular, because we are talking about very like high-tech stuff, but you also have to see what is your audience. If the audience is like even people that are still reading the magazines that you can find in a waiting room at the dentist or the hairdresser, well, just go ahead. Go ahead, try to convince the journalists to publish these stories. Give your stories already ready, and give them and publish it. Or just as journalists, try to publish your story even in those magazines, because it's important, because you cannot just, it's not very useful if you want to communicate just to people that already are sensitive on these issues. It's very important even to go to the very old women that think, no, I'm very afraid about this guy because he's the alien, and instead through a very, even if it's a very emotional story, but it's working, that's fine. It's working. You pass your message.
So Valeria would say that she employs the most old-fashioned technology of all. She wrote a book. So this theory of technological Darwinism suggests that as new technologies evolve, they don't kill off old technologies. They just help you better understand what those old technologies do best. And I think you've highlighted that extremely effectively here. Balázs, you bring up something fascinating when it comes to media, which is that in a sense, when you say a form of activism is sharing, you're instrumentalizing the media process. You're making it part of the activism itself. And so perhaps as a starting point, maybe we can open this up more generally to, how has technology's changed journalism a lot. How has technology changed activism? Not just what you produce, but how it's responded to and how it's disseminated.
Don't look at me like that. from the journalistic point of view, I have nothing to say, honestly. I'm not a journalist. I did work with journalists before for many years, but I'm not sure I know that. From the activist, from the human rights activist point of view, I think it's really simple. Now, at least those activists which are living in happier countries, and I absolutely understand the difference between Africa and Europe, have access to technologies and methods which even 10 years ago would have been impossible to get access. Not only the way how handheld consumer cameras are developing, the way how editing softwares are there, but also the way how simply everyone in Europe now owns a smartphone which has the ability to record amazing stuff. To me, the interesting part is to make a difference between quality and content. And the way I say this, because one of the most successful mobilizing videos in the field of drug policy advocacy in Europe was a piece which was recorded almost by an accident. Something in the United Nations. Since gone director of the UNODC, the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, answering to a panel of drug reform activists and NGOs, and simply refusing to answer a really important question. The activists raised it again and again, and the director said no. Practically said, I won't answer this. A camera was there, and it was recorded with a really bad quality. No one cared about the quality after it, and it went really huge. So again, I'm not saying that the shittier something is, the more interesting. Of course not. But that's really interesting how audiences. At least the committed part of the audiences are, don't care about the quality of the stuff. And one thing, just to put things on earth, I'm in human rights, and I think it's very important to be realistic with our distribution and outreach goals. In most of the cases, like it or not, human rights activists are defending the rights of minorities or the rights of people who are not interesting, attractive, or important for mainstream society. And because of this, it's very important to set up again realistic goals. Number of unique visitors and on any given website, very important. Yes. Number of people who take action is more important for me. And the same is true for viewers of the videos human rights organizations are producing. Number of people who've seen them, great. Number of people who signed letters, joined campaigns, donated, from the point of view of impact is a bit more important.
I want to relate to what you just said, because I do think that sometimes we kind of give up to the fact that we dealing with boring stuff that people don't want to see. But I think that especially with this, this new, Facebook, Twitter, Google, all the possibility to, to push messaging and to use ads and to pay money for engagement, and we did some campaign in places we cannot use traditional media, and basically it's scientific methods. You invest this in this money, you're getting this in these likes. It's getting more popular. You're taking methods from the commercial world about profiling and sending messages and using in the methods. And I think many times you have to be smart enough which and how we craft a message to get the people engaged, and sometimes going around the main issue and building something completely different to get them slowly into where you want to put them and send the right message. So I think there is a lot for us to learn about how to do it, and there is a way to pass traditional media. What's happening in many cases that sometimes when you have a lot of attraction and you manage to grow a website or grow Facebook, and suddenly you have 50,000 people engaging, and there's a story, and you manage to get some politician to comment, and then it's becoming a story. And then suddenly the news want to tell the story that they didn't want to tell before, just because of the reaction around it. So there's all kind of ways to use media. Also, very classical way to use local media that is not interested or can't publish stuff is to go to the international media. Yeah. Can you just do it slower after in the tape. So you're getting and you publishing stuff in international media, and then the local media, because they have their own self-censorship sometimes, because they're afraid, they can refer to foreigner sources that said something about it, and then you can create a story also. So I think the media a lot of time want to publish stuff, but they don't have the right angle to do it, or the pressure not to do it. So
Yeah.
I guess it's all kind of way to do it.
Just one small thing. I'm working for an organization which has a living donor who is very proud, and I'm also very proud of being able to support unsolvable issues. Problems which are very difficult, if not almost impossible, to target. That's a great thing. And at the same time, when we are trying to sell our stuff on very difficult, unsolvable, seemingly unsolvable issues to mainstream media, I don't think we should get surprised that people are, they are not interested. In the previous, one of the previous panels, someone mentioned an example. 400 people died in the Mediterranean a week ago, which didn't make it to the Italian media at all. The same example what you mentioned. Why the news, the fight between 10 Muslim and 10 Christian people on a boat made it everywhere. There is a thing in news value which I don't think NGOs can seriously have an impact, but it's really important how we are framing our stories. And honestly, at the moment, what's happening at the Mediterranean, for many, large part of the European audience, seems to be a tragic but almost unsolvable issue. So, advocates and organizations and individual activists have a serious responsibility how to frame something and show a path of at least possible solutions, or name the responsible organizations, authorities, countries, international bodies, etc. Because simply covering the terrible, tragical, stories is not is not helping people to connect with this thing. People are not consuming media to learn about how tragic and terrible things are. Unfortunately.
No, it was great to follow on. The BBC released a game, I think, a few days ago that said, I think it's in the life of a Syrian, and it gamifies an experience. So you kind of get faced with these choices. Do you choose the right boat? And if you choose the wrong boat, then you're dead, and then you can share it to your friends, like, oh, I died, and then you can play again. So some people think this is great as a way to bring audiences in, to get them participating with these real life scenario choices. Some people are horrified. I'm not going to pass judgment here, but I just wanted to talk about other ways that new technology is affecting activism, and I think we can also see it in Spain last week when they had the holograms, protest holograms. And for anyone who didn't see this was it was, so Spain is trying to pass a lot of laws against protesting in certain areas, and so they used holograms of protesters, and I think that this kind of activism around with this kind of technology, I think we're going to see more of it. There's now research groups that will that have been set up to help activists navigate through augmented reality, mass data mining, mass image processing. So activists can go to this one organization and say, hey, I've got this unsolvable issue, and there's all this new technology that other sectors are using. How can I match that new technology to my issue? And they'll do the research and say, hey, try this very obscure mass batch image processing technique. So I think we'll see more of that. Another thing that was recently done in a public space was like a digital screen of a woman who had been a victim of domestic violence, and the more you look at her, the better her bruises become, as a way of saying, don't ignore it, look at it. And so the screen would recognize how many people were looking at it, and then subsequently she would get less bruised.
Brilliant.
That's amazing.
So, And I just wanted to say one more thing if I have time.
You've got all the time in the world.
Okay. So this is all about kind of visualization or getting people engaged, but there's also the other side, which is monitoring, documentation, and investigation, and how technology is changing that. So I think the example from Videra is and taking images and using visual investigation as a tool rather than as an end result. I think we're going to see more of that. We're also interested at Tactical Tech. We do a lot of work on privacy and how to avoid having digital traces about yourself, so how to kind of circumvent so much data being captured about you. But we're also interested in the flip side of using those digital traces for investigation. So there's lots of examples recently where someone in America, a counselor, was taking a lot of business trips in his office's private jet, but he was putting these pictures on Instagram, and he was leaving the geolocation data left on. And then a group then got the metadata from the pictures and saw that he was going to places that he wasn't going for professional reasons, and then he was fired. So we're also interested in using technology and the bad things about technology in the flip side.
Was this an example for the good thing or the bad thing?
This is an example of taking what we see as a bad thing, the constant kind of monitoring, and using it for good.
Just wanted to add a couple of things. When you were talking about technology, I think it is. All the tools that can give you the technology now they're brilliant. But one of my very particular experience in Egypt, when Mubarak decided to cut internet, they didn't have any. They were using Twitter, Facebook, and blah blah blah. But at that moment, I learned that the most powerful thing that they could use, it was real social networks that have been built in before the revolution. If they hadn't built up the real social networks, and Mubarak cut down internet, and they couldn't manage all the very useful tools provided by the technology, it was a disaster, but at the same time, the good side of technology is also that I don't know if you know the project, I suggest you to have a look on the website of Bots for People. It's a group of activists. They started their job in 2011, and when all the Arab uprisings came out, and they started monitoring what was happening in the Mediterranean Sea, and thanks to the technology. So they started, you can find this online map, and they were able to rebuild some of the disasters that happened, even with the responsibility of Italy and other countries. And they went to court. And then, when you were talking about the no solution situations, it happened to me when I was with other people watching the TV, and there was one of these tragedy in the Mediterranean, and they were looking at me because they know what I'm doing. So they say, listen, it's too complicated. It seems like there's no solution. It's too big something too much that we cannot understand what. And I just said, just pass a simple message. These people are fleeing the wars. Maybe because most of the people don't know the context of origin of this person that are fleeing. So when you just say these people are fleeing the war and they are seeking protection, how can you close the borders? And that is a very simple message. It's like a human issue, and people sometimes, it's not very easy, but sometimes they can understand.
Just to, if I wasn't correct, that's exactly what you said. The unsolvable issue is the fact that Europe is one of the, richest region of the world, and there will be people who want to seek protection and a better life from, terrible and unfortunate places which are close to Europe. That's the unsolvable. providing protection, saving people's lives is not impossible. You know, we've been there. You know, we know how to do it. So that's what I'm talking about when I talk about the need of showing a potential path, because simply presenting the issue as an influx with which Europe can do anything, that's what when people they say, okay, let's just close our eyes. Telling them that how much lives we could save if there would be European support for the maritime operations, that's a solution. That's something.
And sorry if I add something. And I was this conversation just this morning with one of my colleagues, another consultant at Open Society, and we were talking about just giving like the importance of data, giving data to journalists, because when, for example, the public opinion now is experiencing a kind of panic because we are experiencing an invasion. But if you take and you spread data, for example, last year in 2014, the percentage were telling us that there were 2 asylum seekers, no refugees, so 2 asylum seekers every 2,000 people. So it's like Perugia, this city, is about 2,000 people. So it's like if here there are 2 asylum seekers. And in Sweden, for example, there were just 8 asylum seekers every 1,000 people. So I think if you want to have an impact even on the panic in this situation, you have just to spread data and try to spread data.
Okay, so that question was about technology, and almost all of you talked about formats, which is really interesting. So now we can talk about video. I start from the position that the internet has changed our brains, that we think in different ways because of the web. So, Balázs, was it your suggestion that shitty did not equal good? I love that as a formulation. You were talking about handheld video footage, right? So actually, I think that shitty does equal good. I think that there has been a cultural shift away from the authoritative professional journalist in front of a screen, perfectly made up, to the handheld cell phone in the street. We now much prefer, and we now much more trust the handheld footage in the street. If you allow me to be trite, it's sort of authority to authentic. And so that's one way in which the internet has changed our heads. Another way in which the internet has changed our heads, I would suggest, is that we don't care about stories anymore. I don't think stories have the impact that they used to do. I'm trying to pick a fight. So, of all the fascinating new formats that you've just described, that story, the description of the domestic violence piece had me almost in tears. I mean, just hearing about it was extraordinarily powerful. You're talking about handheld footage, a simple data point, not a story, a data point. Is videos really the future of advocacy? Are there not other, more interesting formats designed for the 21st century of people who do not believe in stories? I say this at the International Journalism Festival.
So a story, when the first materials that we got from the project in the West Bank was published in the BBC, it was I think like 12 years ago, half of the screen was black and it was written big amateur video. It was amazing, and you open the news today, it's all kind of shaky. So it was, I think, like in the last, really had a shift from this, the guy standing there in the war zone with his coat and saying, oh, I'm here and we can do it much more, we're doing well today. I also think generally because things are shifting all the time. We talked today about video, we're going to take in 10 years about virtual reality and about all kind of models that will present reality in a different way. Obviously, we will get there. Technology is getting cheaper, data mine is getting faster, so definitely going to be there. I think in a way what's happening now when we have more and more visuals outside, journalists becoming more verificators than really storytellers. Mm-hmm. So they are, agriculturing the information, but the way to be able to do it, first of all, they have to verify it and then it's becoming a story. And somebody will have to make order in all these visuals and kind of wrap them together. So editor and verificator more than really journalists in the classical sense.
Well, there is of course, there is the time thing, I think 10 years ago, short advocacy videos meant 20 minutes. 5 years ago meant 10 minutes. Now a good, something that you talked about, probably no more than 90 seconds, right? Or not even. So that's one thing. How are we able to adapt to that? The other thing is not only from the side of the users, how users perceive technology or quality or content versus the format. When we started to go to UN meetings on drugs, again, Commission on Narcotic Drugs, that's the UNODC, and that big UN meeting which decided about what direction the prohibition and the war on drugs internationally should take, and that's an incredibly close environment. And when with the NGO when I was working with, we started to go with a small handheld camera. Just suddenly we realized that the very same diplomats and UN officials who never ever would talk to a journalist with a professional equipment, somehow we just flew under their radar, and they were not realizing that the line between an NGO and a big journalistic organization. I mean, of course there is a line, but what they were talking to us, it will go viral. It will go. So that's also interesting. The future, I'm not sure. I mean, any of you or us who knows what direction video advocacy will take or will head in the next 5 years. Don't hold your secret. Just tell it.
There's a research that I think Stanford did it, kind of looking at how people are going to consume news in the next 5 to 10 years. And it's a very sad result. It's probably going to be video of 16 seconds. This will be the 16 seconds. This will be the format that will be much watchable. You will have, articles, and the New York Times will be existing, but we're going to be more and more boutique. So you can go and read articles, but the classical looking at news will be 16 seconds.
Okay. I'll be very brief. I don't believe you that you said stories don't have impact, because you just said you nearly cried at the story I told. So I think that there's still
she got you.
But I just want to talk about one project, because I think it brings a lot of everything I'm saying. So again with Syria, so Meta, 1 hour in 1 hour of YouTube's life, there's 300 hours of. Wait, does that feel right?
More than the billions. Just say a big number.
Sorry, I'm sorry. 1 minute is 300 hours. Yeah. So that is a huge amount of video. But that's not just the huge amount of video that we're meant to be consuming. It's a huge amount of video that is eventually going to be lost. So there's a project that some people have started called Syrian Archive. And what they're aware of is that in Syria, there's an amazing amount of documentation that is being lost on YouTube. And it's being lost because people have put it up there, and they have to now take it down for their safety, for them to be identified. But also there's nowhere to bring it together. So in the future, when people are going to hopefully being held to account, there's going to be all of this wealth of evidence that YouTube would have held that would be in no way sortable. So this project, I think, encapsulates the problems, is that they're trying to bring all of this video together so that historically we can then go back and use it to tell the story that needs to be told.
Okay, just briefly, I don't know where we are going as well, but a couple of days ago I joined a panel, and the title here, the title was From Storytelling to Story Experiencing. So I thought, wow, let's go and see. And then I was in that panel, and I thought, I really hope the future is not going to be this, because they were saying that the future of the consumers, we'll have to use a kind of Oculus, I don't know, yeah? And that they're going, so the journalists will become like someone that will build up like games. I mean, you take pictures of this room, and then you can let the consumer experience, so you can reproduce as well, like a work context, life if it's a game. So news has gaming, and I think it's quite dangerous. I think the future is not going to do this. I'm old-fashioned, I'm sorry.
Ok. Adesso apriamo a voi tutti We open to you in English or Italian. I will try and translate, and you can tell me that I'm translating badly when I do.
It's green. Okay. Guido Romeo, I'm a journalist for Wired Italy. Two questions. The first one is for Oren. Fact-checking. Maybe you don't go to the media, but you go to court. So I don't think you bypass fact-checking without disclosing information that it needs to. I mean, identities and information you want to keep secure. How do you deal with that? Because I understand, I've been to the territories myself, so it's not that easy to get back to people there and get what is outside the footage. And we all know that a piece of footage doesn't tell the whole story. So, the other question is for Valeria. Are you sure about the 2 asylum seekers per 2,000 Italians? Because that's a lot of people. That's more than 30,000 asylum seekers over 60 million Italian inhabitants. So I'm a bit worried about that myself.
Okay, so that's one question. Can we take any more questions? We've got 10 minutes left, I've been told, so apologies. Are there any other questions?
We have 10 minutes to answer a question.
I don't believe it. Wow, guys, you've been heroic. You've sorted it all out. Okay.
There's one more there.
There's
Okay.
another one.
So, if the mainstream media
Can you give us your name?
Yeah, I'm Brian Conley, Small World News, and I train journalists all around the world, and I think I agree with you that the mainstream media is not going to tell those stories for exactly the reason Balázs said, that the most important stories are not part of the audience, unfortunately. But how do we do that? You know, what's the business model? How do you pay the bills? How do you make it possible? I mean, I don't think that, unfortunately, I don't think that NGOs are going to change the world, you know? And so we have to figure out a way to pay our bills and feed our families.
That is a monster question. Maybe we should have a panel afterwards about how to do that. Meantime, over to you guys.
Oh, there's one.
There's more.
One other small
Name.
thing. I will in a second. I'll get to that, and you'll see why. At the risk of overdosing on Open Society, there is also an Open Society program on independent journalism, which I represent. But I'm not up there. But I also used to sit on the other side of the table. I used to work for Witness, which is a human rights organization, and I went in there as a journalist to work on UGC, on human rights footage, and work with everyone there. So it is a real. I hope that in the last 8 minutes now, you'll come back to this blurred line. I've sat on both sides of it. Sometimes I'm on it. And the people we work with, video is becoming both on it in the world of journalism and huge amounts of investment happening in video now. And many of the people who consume that journalism, you just have to look at something like Fusion, which actively sets itself up as a media network, but rooted within it is an entire ethic of we are activists, we support activists, we do this, that, and the other, and it's rooted in activism and change. Do you see other parts of the media, other than the kind of ones which you're wailing on, changing? And you talked about the blurred lines. Can you come back to the blurred lines? Because you've talked an awful lot about sort of projects and activism and so on, but you haven't really talked about the journalism and activism merging. So that's what I'd love to hear more about if you have time.
So, yeah.
That's entirely my fault.
Yeah, I will start with the fact-checking. And because we're working in places where it's very hard to re-verify the information and get back to there, so the idea when you're building a shooting plan or getting information, you're training and working with the people how to gather as much as information as possible while they're doing the action. So, when they're going, filming the road, filming road sign, watches, newspapers, so we can verify the location and using Google Maps after and establish the event when it's happening. And this variety of way to check. And in some places when it's very difficult, and we have a specific verification team that's going after and checking information, asking questions. And sometimes we're not getting all the question, but at least then we should be honest enough to say, I have 60% of the information that I wanted, verified, the rest I don't have, and if I'm working with journalists, that's what I would tell him, you know, this is what I have for you, go and check the rest if needed or if you want to. So this is on the fact checking.
I mean, last year we had in Italy 65,000 people arriving, and it's not such a big number. In Germany, they had around 200,000 people. And then again, if you think about, like, I remember at the end of August, I was in the Milano Central Station, and I could see in a few hours more than 1,000 Syrians passing by the station in transit. And you know what? In the whole year, in 2014, if I'm not wrong, only the city of Milan, only like, if I'm not, I'd like to be more specific, but if I'm not wrong, there were 6 or 8 Syrians that sought asylum there. So that means that people just pass by the country, but they don't stay. They want to reach other countries. They want to reach their family members. So, and I don't think it's such a big number.
Okay, so that final question, which is the activism journalism piece. Yeah. We got
model and
yeah, we have model is a separate panel. The reason that we didn't jump into that, Samir, for which apologies, is that I think I take as read that when you package information, you frame it, and therefore there is an intrinsic and absolute and total and forever link between a certain kind of advocacy and journalism ever since Marshall McLuhan told us about it. So I wanted to talk about the formats rather than that particular piece. My apologies, we now get to talk about it.
Okay, so the model, I mean, I don't see realistically a sustainable model for new types of media which are only concerned about social issues and which don't have a very targeted audience. But I do see, even in the narrow EU geography where I'm working, I do see sustainable models of socially conscious media focusing on investigative reporting and doing pretty well. You know, El Diario in Spain in no more than 2 years and not only became a really important source of information, but they have about 6 million unique visitors a month, which made them the second most visited site in Spain. You know, Mediapart is doing pretty well in France. So I do believe that you can actually make a living with good content. The line between activism and journalism, I do see more and more journalists who individually are happy to work with NGOs, and that's a great thing. And I still see a cohort of publishers and representative of the old school who are very worried when their papers, magazines, and sites are involved in activism. And I think in some countries where law enforcement is doing its job, it's okay. In other countries which are living in state capture type of because of corruption or crime or wrongdoings of public administration, it's a problem. And I think there will be a need. There is a need of a new approach.
So luckily the bells are tolling, so I can probably get away with like 30 seconds. But I'm just going to, about the fact-checking question, I just have one small project, which is the Rashomon project, which is an open-source MIT project. You throw a bunch of videos in of the same event from different angles, and it lets you watch it in a timeline. And it's a really good tool where you can kind of see things from different angles and look at how one video is longer than the other. And I think it adds an element if there's a big event that a lot of people have handheld cameraed. The business model question, I personally think there's a need for NGOs to produce more digestible content. I think that some NGOs are falling behind when it comes to well, for example, Vine, like everyone went crazy for Vine. NGOs never touched it. If the future of video or consuming information is 90 seconds, or 16 seconds, even better. I think every generation gets scared about this new way to communicate. And I think Vine is very watchable. I think NGOs should start be doing shorter things. I think they should start doing more engaging things. And I think possibly that's a way that big media outlets will be able to consume that information. I think places like Reddit are important. I think places like the whatever button. So I was talking to an academic who made a visualization who had 500,000 hits from the whatever button, a website where you click it and it gives you a random link. And Reddit, he got 1 million views from Reddit. NGOs are not touching these kind of places, and I think that's important.
Thank you all very much indeed. If I hadn't been told personally that the session was over, the church did tell us. Can I ask you all to thank Balázs, Gabby, Oren, and Valeria for a fascinating session? Thank you very much.